My wife told me during a road trip through Nevada. Maybe marriage isn't the adventure I imagined. I turned the car around without drama, invested everything into a project waiting for my attention, and eventually she heard about the outcome. Maybe marriage isn't the adventure I imagined. She said it somewhere between mile marker 112 and the flat, sun-bleached middle of nowhere, Nevada. No build-up. No fight before it. No argument the night before. No cold shoulder at breakfast. No loaded silence at the gas station. Just the hum of the engine. The cracked asphalt stretching dead straight toward a horizon that never got any closer, and those 9 words landing like a rock through a windshield. I kept both hands on the wheel. I didn't flinch. Didn't turn to look at her. Didn't ask her to repeat herself, even though part of me, the stubborn, hopeful part, wanted to believe I'd misheard. I just watched the road. For about 4 full seconds, neither of us said anything. The radio was playing something low and forgettable. A truck passed us going the other direction, and the rush of displaced air made the car shake slightly. Then she shifted in the passenger seat, adjusting herself like she'd just said something mildly inconvenient instead of something that rearranged the entire floor plan of my life. I just think, she started again, softer this time, that I expected something different. Still I said nothing, because I understood, right there, at 68 miles per hour through the Nevada desert, that whatever I said next was going to matter more than almost anything I'd ever said before. And I also understood that nothing I said was going to fix what she'd just put into the air between us. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 34. She was 32. We'd been married for 3 years, together for 2 before that, and this road trip had been her idea. Something she called a reset, a chance to reconnect, to remember who we were before mortgages and work calendars and the particular exhaustion that comes from 2 people running parallel lives in the same house. We were heading to a rental cabin outside of Lake Tahoe. For days, no laptops, no agenda. That had been the plan, anyway. Her name was Claire, and I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about a villain. Claire wasn't cruel. She wasn't manipulative or calculating. She was, in the truest sense, just a woman who had built a picture in her head of what her life was supposed to look like, and somewhere along the way, the real version had started to disappoint her. I'd seen the edges of it for months. The way she'd scroll through travel accounts on her phone, lingering on photos of couples in foreign cities, on mountaintops, in candlelit restaurants in places neither of us could easily afford. The way she'd sometimes say things like, "I feel like we just exist," with a kind of tired resignation that I never quite knew how to answer. The way she'd started spending more time with her friend group from work, a crowd I barely knew, whose names came up constantly in conversation, but whose faces I couldn't connect to anything real. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself she just needed more from me, more spontaneity, more effort, more proof that I was paying attention. And so I planned this trip. I'd booked the cabin, packed a cooler, mapped out a scenic route through Nevada instead of the faster highway option. I thought I was showing her something. I thought I was saying, "I hear you. I'm trying. Look at me trying." But somewhere along Highway 50, between the ghost towns and the alkali flats, she'd decided to show me something instead. I drove for another 6 or 7 miles after she spoke. The silence between us wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after a fight, charged and brittle. It was more like the silence of something that had already been decided, a paperwork silence, a formality silence. And that frightened me more than any shouting would have. "Can you tell me what you mean by that?" I finally said. My voice was even. "I'm proud of that, actually." She looked out her window. "I don't know how to explain it without hurting you. You're not going to break me, Claire." She turned to look at me then, and I kept my eyes on the road because I knew if I looked at her, really looked at her, I might say something I couldn't take back. "I feel like I've been waiting," she said. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. Something to happen. Something to change. I feel like every week is the same week, and I keep thinking eventually it'll feel different, but it doesn't." "That's called adulthood," I said. It came out flatter than I intended. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite anything, and turned back to her window. "See, that's what I mean," she said quietly. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "What is? You reduce everything. Like everything is already figured out. Like there's no room for wanting more." "I'm not reducing anything. I'm telling you that no one's life feels like a highlight reel every week." "I know that." Her voice had an edge now. I'm not asking for a highlight reel. I'm asking for something to feel alive. That word, alive. I sat with it for a moment. It's a hell of a thing to have your wife of 3 years tell you that her life doesn't feel alive, that her marriage doesn't feel alive, that you, in some silent, unintentional, everyday way, have become the thing making her feel less. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't say any of the things that were stacking up in the back of my throat, the counterarguments, the defense, the inventory of every sacrifice and compromise and quiet effort I'd made over 5 years. I just thought. And what I thought, as clearly as I've ever thought anything, was this. She's not asking me to fix something. She's telling me something is already over. I took the next exit. It was a dusty pull-off with a weather-beaten sign for a town I'd never heard of and probably never would again. I turned the car around. Not dramatically. No tire screech. No accelerated U-turn. No storming out of the vehicle. I just made a calm, methodical 3-point turn on a gravel shoulder while a tumbleweed actually, and I'm not exaggerating, rolled past in the background like the universe was staging the whole thing for effect. "What are you doing?" Claire asked. "Going home." "What? Why?" "We still have." "Claire." I looked at her then. For the first time since she'd spoken. "I'm not going to sit in a cabin with you for 4 days and pretend I didn't hear what you just said." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "Do you want to talk about this?" she said finally. "Not right now." When? I still believe her. "Then what is this?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I think I married you because you felt safe," she said. "And then I spent the next 3 years waiting for safe to start feeling like enough." Something about that sentence rearranged things inside me permanently. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. And because buried in it was a truth about me that I hadn't fully let myself look at. I had been playing it safe. Not just in the marriage. In everything. For context, and I'll keep this brief, because the backstory matters, but it isn't the point. I had been sitting on a project for almost 2 years. An old warehouse building on the edge of a mid-sized city about 40 minutes from where we lived. I'd bought it with a business partner named Tom, 6 months before Claire and I got married, with the idea of converting it into a mixed-use creative space, ground floor for studios and workshops, upper level for small batch production and co-working. The kind of space that cities were starting to want, but hadn't quite figured out how to build well yet. We had the permits. We had a basic renovation plan. We even had interest from a few potential anchor tenants, a ceramics collective, a small woodworking outfit, a specialty roaster who'd been looking for a production space. And then, I stalled. Not because the project fell apart, but because I got scared. The numbers required a significant personal investment on top of what Tom and I had already put in. It meant drawing on savings, refinancing the house, taking on risk that felt very real and very heavy when I was also planning a wedding and trying to be the kind of steady, responsible partner I thought a marriage required. So I held back, and I kept holding back, and the months piled up. And Tom, patient, quietly frustrated Tom, had been covering the carrying costs and nudging me every few weeks with updates I'd been reading and filing away without responding to properly. The project was there, waiting, like a thing I'd promised myself I'd eventually get around to. The week after the road trip, Claire and I moved into a strange, suspended state. We were still living in the same house, still sharing meals, still being polite to each other in the specific, careful way of two people who've said something irreversible and are now figuring out what that means. She didn't ask me to move out. I didn't suggest it. We hadn't told anyone. Not her sister, not my 2 close friends, not the couple we sometimes had dinner with on Friday nights. It was just a quiet, private fracture that we were both circling without fully acknowledging. And in that week, something shifted in me. Not a dramatic shift. Not a decision I made in one big moment. More like a gradual, creeping realization that I had been living my life in a kind of permanent preparation mode. Preparing for stability. Preparing for the right moment. Preparing to eventually take the risks I actually wanted to take once things were settled enough, safe enough, certain enough. And the road trip had made something clear. Things were never going to be settled enough. Claire had just told me, in her own way, that settled felt like a slow death to her. And if I was being honest with myself, really honest, I wasn't sure it felt that different to me. On a Thursday morning, 10 days after the Nevada U-turn, I called Tom. "I need to know where we actually are with the warehouse," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Home." "What? Can you come down here? To the building?" "Yeah." I drove the 40 minutes without overthinking it. Tom was waiting outside when I pulled up. He's 6'2", a little weathered, and has the specific energy of someone who's been quietly right about something for a long time and is choosing not to say "I told you so." He handed me a coffee from the place across the street. We walked the space together. It looked different than the last time I'd been there. Not better, not worse, just more settled into its own neglect, like a building that had accepted its limbo and made peace with it. "Talk to me honestly," I said. "If I walk away right now, what's the realistic outcome?" Tom leaned against the support beam. "Honestly, we sell it at a modest loss, split it, and you go on with your life." "And if I don't walk away?" He looked at me. "That depends on how much you're willing to put in. Not just money, time, decision-making, actually showing up." "I know. I don't think you do," he said. "Not yet." That stung a little. But he wasn't wrong. I nodded. "I want to do this," I said. "Say it like you mean it." "Tom, I want to do this. I'm ready." He studied me for a moment. Then he gave me a small nod. "All right," he said. "Then let's stop waiting." I told Claire that evening. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I said, "I'm moving forward with the warehouse project. I'm going to refinance this house to free up the capital, and I'm going to spend the next several months making this thing real." She looked at me carefully. "Why now?" "Because I've been waiting for the right moment, and I finally understood that there isn't one." She didn't say anything for a few seconds. "Are you doing this because of what I said in the car?" I thought about that. "Yes and no," I said. "I think what you said in the car made me honest about things I'd been avoiding. But I'm not doing this to prove something to you. I'm doing this because it's what I should have done 2 years ago." She nodded slowly. "What does that mean for us?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. And for the first time, I think she appreciated the honesty. I want to be real about what the next few months looked like. Because in these kinds of stories, there's a tendency to make the working on yourself part sound romantic. A montage of early mornings and sawdust and meaningful progress with a good soundtrack underneath it. The reality was messier. The refinancing process took longer than expected because of some documentation issues that required 3 weeks of back and forth with a loan officer who seemed to be personally inconvenienced by my existence. The renovation contractor we'd originally planned to use had moved on to other projects, which meant Tom and I spent a month and a half interviewing replacements and getting quotes that were significantly higher than our original estimates. One of our anchor tenants, the Ceramics Collective, pulled out in month 2 because they'd found another space. I got 2 hours of sleep on more nights than I can count. I ate bad food at weird hours. I spent long evenings in a folding chair in the middle of a half-gutted industrial building going over spreadsheets on a laptop propped on a moving box. And during all of this, Claire and I were doing something that I don't have a clean word for. Not separating, not reconciling, just coexisting. Carefully. She had started seeing a therapist. She told me about it matter-of-factly one evening, not as a statement about us, just as a thing she was doing for herself. I said I thought that was good. I meant it. Some evenings we'd eat dinner together and talk about neutral things, something she'd seen in the news, something that had gone sideways with a work project of hers. Other evenings she'd be upstairs, and I'd be at the kitchen counter with my laptop, and the house had the quiet of 2 separate people sharing an address. I didn't push. I didn't bargain. I didn't perform. I think, and I'm only saying this in retrospect, that was the first time in my marriage that I had actually stopped performing. Stopped being the version of myself that I thought she needed, and started just being the version that was true. About 3 months in, something happened that I didn't expect. I was at the building on a Saturday. There was a plumbing issue that required me to be there for a walkthrough with the contractor, and Claire showed up. She just appeared in the doorway of the main floor space, still in her jacket from wherever she'd been, looking around at the scaffolding and the exposed beams and the stacks of reclaimed wood we were planning to use for the mezzanine level. I didn't ask how she knew where I was. I was easy to find those days. "This is bigger than I thought," she said. "Yeah." She walked slowly toward the center of the space, looking up at the ceiling, 16 feet of original industrial steel and timber framing that we'd spent considerable time preserving. "You love this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." She turned to look at me, and for a moment, her expression had something in it that I hadn't seen in a while. Not love, necessarily. Something more complicated than that. More like recognition. Like she was seeing something she'd been looking for and didn't expect to find here, in a half-renovated warehouse with sawdust on the floor. She left after about 20 minutes. We didn't talk about what the visit meant. Neither of us brought it up that evening. But something had shifted, slightly, in the atmosphere between us. For months in, We had our first real conversation. Not a polite kitchen table coexistence conversation. An actual, risky, honest conversation. It was a Tuesday evening. She came home from work and found me at the counter with a set of floor plans spread out, and instead of going upstairs, she poured herself a glass of water and sat down across from me. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "When did you stop being scared of this?" "The project." I put my pen down. "I'm not sure I did. I think I just started doing it anyway." She nodded, like that meant something to her. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" she said. "Like, what this is? The two of us. Every day." And I looked at her, and I don't have an answer yet. But I know that whatever happens, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in preparation mode. That part's done. She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said slowly, "I said what I said in Nevada because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "That you'd never change. That we'd just keep moving forward on a track and nothing would ever actually surprise me. And now," she looked at me with something genuine in her eyes. "Now I'm surprised." I didn't rush the moment. I didn't try to turn it into a declaration or a resolution. I just nodded. And we sat there in the kitchen together for a while, looking at floor plans, and she started asking questions, and I started answering them. And it was the most real conversation we'd had in maybe 2 years. Month 5 was when things with the project started to actually move. The renovation hit a rhythm. The main floor was taking shape. The open, flexible studio space that could be configured for different users, with high ceilings and the kind of natural light that industrial buildings have when someone finally stops boarding up the windows and lets it in. Tom had brought in a new anchor tenant to replace the ceramics collective, a woman named Dana who ran a textile and surface design studio, mid-sized operation, serious about long-term leases. She walked the space on a gray Thursday morning with a measured, professional skepticism that I respected. She asked hard questions about loading dock access, about climate control tolerances for fabric storage, about lease flexibility. I answered every question straight. No oversell. No optimistic hand-waving. Just facts and honest ranges. At the end of the walkthrough, she shook my hand and said, "I'll have my attorney review the terms." Tom looked at me as she walked back to her car. "She's in," he said quietly. "You think?" She wouldn't have mentioned her attorney if she wasn't. He was right. We had a signed letter of intent by the following Wednesday. 2 other tenants committed within the next 6 weeks. A furniture designer named Cole who needed both workshop space and a small retail-facing front, and a photo and video production studio run by a couple, Ben and his partner, who'd been looking for a permanent space for their commercial work. 3 anchor tenants. Enough to make the numbers work. Not comfortably. Not yet, but enough to see the shape of something real on the other side of all this work. I remember sitting in the parking lot of the building one evening after a long day, just sitting in my car in the dark, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, more like alignment. The feeling of being pointed in a direction that was actually mine. Claire and I were talking more by then. Real talking. She had been in therapy for 4 months, and something in her had changed too. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the way that a person changes when they actually start examining the things they've been avoiding. One evening she told me something. She said her therapist had asked her to think about what she'd actually been looking for when she'd said she wanted adventure. And what she'd come to realize, she said, was that it had never really been about travel or novelty or any of the things she'd been scrolling through on her phone. It was about watching someone she loved take a risk and mean it. She said it quietly, looking at her hands. "I wanted to see you care about something enough to be afraid of it," she said. I let that land. "I was afraid of this from the start," I said. "I know that now." "You didn't then?" She shook her head. "You hit it too well. You were so steady all the time. So reasonable." I couldn't tell the difference between courage and complacency. That sentence stayed with me for days. The difference between courage and complacency. Both can look like stillness from the outside. The distinction is whether the stillness is chosen or whether it's fear wearing the mask of calm. Month 7. The building had a soft opening. Not a grand launch. We weren't ready for that yet, and I'd learned my lesson about forcing readiness before things are actually ready. Just an open day. Tenants setting up, doors open, people wandering in from the neighborhood. Tom had done some local outreach, a small notice in a couple of community channels, a mention from a local blog that covered independent creative spaces. I spent most of that day moving between spaces, talking to people, answering questions. By late afternoon, there were maybe 60, 70 people in the building at different points. Dana had part of her textile work laid out on one of the open tables, a casual display. Cole had set up a small demo of his joinery work in the corner of his workshop bay. Ben and his partner were shooting ambient video of the whole event, which I only realized meant they'd be sharing it somewhere when someone told me later that the footage was getting passed around online. It was, in a word, real. For the first time since Tom and I had bought the building, it was real. Claire came in the late afternoon. She walked around by herself for a while before she found me. I watched her from across the room without her knowing. She had her hands in her jacket pockets, looking around at the space, the exposed beams, the warm lighting, the people in the middle of making things, with an expression I hadn't seen on her in years. She looked absorbed. She looked present. She found me eventually near the back, near the freight elevator, talking to someone from the neighborhood who'd asked about the rental timeline for the remaining units. When that conversation ended, she stepped up beside me. "This is something," she said. "Yeah, I mean it. This is actually something." I looked at her. "You built this," she said. And then immediately, "You and Tom built this." "The correction is fair," I said. She laughed. A real one. The kind I hadn't heard in a long time. I need to pause on something here, because I want to be honest about what this story is and what it isn't. This is not a story about how I fixed my marriage by building something impressive. It's not a story about how my wife came back around because I became successful. The truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that the project changed me, and the change in me changed what was possible between us. Not because success impressed her, but because in the process of building something that mattered to me, something I was genuinely afraid of, something that required me to stop waiting and start deciding, I became someone who was actually present in his own life. And that, I think, was what she'd been asking for all along. Not in those words. Not clearly, even to herself. But that was the thing underneath the Nevada comment. Underneath the restlessness. Underneath all the scrolling through other people's lives looking for something she couldn't quite name. She wanted a partner who was showing up. Not just to the marriage, but to his own life. 2 months after the soft opening, Claire and I had a long conversation. One of those kitchen table conversations that starts at 9 in the evening and ends somewhere past midnight. She said, "I think I want to try." I said, "Try what specifically?" She said, "Try again. Really try. Not just coexist in the same house." I sat with that for a moment, because I'd had 8 months to think. 8 months of doing the work I should have been doing for years. 8 months of being honest with myself, sometimes painfully so. And in those 8 months I'd asked myself more than once, if she walked through that door and said she was ready, would I be? "I want to understand something first," I said. She nodded. "The thing in Nevada, that wasn't just about the marriage, was it?" She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "I think I'd been scared about my own choices for a long time. And it was easier to put that on us than to actually look at it. Okay, I'm not saying what I did was fair. I know. Are you angry?" I thought about that honestly. I said, for a while. And then I was too busy to stay angry. And then I realized the anger wasn't actually helping me. So I let it go. Just like that. No, not just like that. It took a while. But yeah, eventually I let it go. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think I'd forgotten what it looked like to watch you want something." "I think I'd forgotten too," I said. We talked for another hour. Not about decisions or terms or what we were going to do. Just talked. Like two people who had figured out how to be honest with each other, maybe for the first time. We started over. Not from the beginning. You can't go back to the beginning. But from where we actually... He's practical and direct and occasionally infuriating. And for 2 years while I stalled and hedged and avoided, he kept the project alive on goodwill and carrying costs and a patience that I genuinely do not deserve. About a month after the soft opening, we had lunch together. Just us, at the diner 2 blocks from the building that had become the unofficial office for our less formal conversations. I told him that the project had changed something in me. He listened. He poured more coffee. He said, "You were always capable of this. You just needed to stop being more committed to your reasons than your results." I wrote that down when I got home. More committed to your reasons than your results. Because that was exactly what I'd been doing. I'd had reasons, good, sensible, defensible reasons, for every year of stalling. And I'd been married to those reasons in a way I'd never been married to the actual outcome I wanted. The full opening happened at the 10-month mark. All 3 anchor tenants fully operational. 2 of the remaining smaller units occupied by a letterpress printer and a product photography one-woman shop. A 6th unit still available and already with a wait list. The building had a name by then, the Millworks, after the original use of the property about 80 years ago. Tom had found a framed historical photograph of the original mill operation, workers standing in front of the building with the particular stiff posture of people being photographed in a time when photographs were still rare. He'd hung it in the entrance hall. I walked past it every day. There was something about it I couldn't quite articulate. The knowledge that a building has a before and a during and an after. That the same walls could hold completely different lives over generations. That you could take something forgotten and make it useful again. Word got around. I don't mean that in a self-congratulatory way. I mean that in a mid-sized city, when a formerly empty building becomes something genuinely functioning and interesting, people notice. A local newspaper did a short piece on the millworks, not a puff piece, more of a straightforward feature about the space and the tenants. A regional business publication mentioned it in a roundup about creative economy spaces. Dana got a significant press mention for her textile work, and she made a point of crediting the building as part of what had made the expansion of her business possible. Tom started fielding calls. People wanting to know if we were planning other projects. People wanting to know if there was a model here that could be replicated. I didn't have good answers to those questions yet, but I kept the conversations going. About a year after the road trip, Claire and I went on another drive. Not to Nevada. Nothing so pointed as that. Just a Saturday afternoon with nowhere specific to be, windows down, heading roughly toward the coast on a road we'd never been on before. We didn't talk the whole time. There were long stretches of comfortable quiet, which sounds unremarkable, but if you'd been in that Nevada silence, the closed-off, everything already decided silence, the difference was everything. This was a quiet that had room in it. At some point she said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't turned the car around?" "Sometimes." "What do you think?" I considered it. I think we would have gotten to the cabin and had 3 days of careful politeness, and then come home and started the slow drift. And I think eventually you would have left, or I would have, and neither of us would have become what we've become. She thought about that. "I think that's right," she said. "Do you regret saying it?" She was quiet for a moment. "No. I think I'd been holding it so long that once it was out, everything became clearer. Even when it was terrible, it was clearer." "Yeah." She turned to look at me. "I'm glad you turned the car around." "Me too." We kept driving. The road curved toward the coast, and the light was doing something long and gold across the fields on our left. And it was one of those moments that doesn't need anything added to it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Safety is not a gift you give someone. I had spent years trying to build a life that was stable and low risk and dependable, and I had believed, genuinely believed, that this was what it meant to love someone well. But safety without aliveness is just a different kind of deprivation. And the person who suffers most from a man who refuses to risk anything is not the man. It's everyone who has to live inside the stillness he mistakes for peace. I was still. I was careful. I was so committed to not failing that I never fully tried. And Claire, restless, dissatisfied, searching for something she couldn't name, had been living next to that stillness and slowly starving inside it. She said what she said in Nevada because she needed me to hear it. And I heard it. And I turned the car around. And then I went home and started building. There's an epilogue here, small but true. About 14 months after the road trip, I got a call from someone I didn't know. A developer. Her name was Priya. She ran a small firm that specialized in adaptive reuse projects. Buildings converted from one purpose to another. She'd heard about the millworks. She'd read the press piece. She had a property in another city, a former printing facility. She said, bigger than our building, more complicated, more expensive. She said she'd been looking for the right partner. She wanted to know if I'd meet with her. I said yes. Tom and I met with her 3 weeks later. The conversation lasted 2.5 hours. I won't tell you what we decided, because that's a different story and it's still happening. But I will tell you that when I walked out of that meeting, I called Tom from the parking lot and said, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And he said, "I'm thinking I'm glad you finally stopped waiting." I told Claire about the meeting that evening. She listened carefully. She asked a few smart questions, the kind that come from genuinely paying attention to something, from knowing the details, from being interested in the life the person next to you is actually living. When I finished, she said, "You're going to do it, aren't you?" "Probably." "Good," she said. And she meant it. I don't know how to neatly package this. I don't have a lesson that fits on a card. What I have is this: a desert highway, an honest sentence, a 3-point turn on a gravel shoulder, a warehouse that needed someone to stop waiting on it, a marriage that needed someone to stop performing in it, A man who finally understood that the life he wanted was not going to assemble itself while he stood at a safe distance and watched. She heard about the outcome, not because I called her to report it, not because I needed her to see it. She heard because she was there, right there, in the middle of it, because we both, finally, decided to be.